The maintenance bay of Orbital Academy Station Delta hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology, but tonight it carried an unusual tension. Cadet Isabella Reeves sat alone at the corner workbench, her movements methodical as she disassembled the worn sidearm piece by piece. The weapon looked ancient compared to the sleek plasma rifles and energy projectors that filled the armory racks around her. Its metal surfaces bore the patina of age, scratches that spoke of countless conflicts, and an unmistakable weight that came from solid construction rather than energy matrices. The other cadets had cleared out hours ago, returning to their quarters after the standard equipment check. But Isabella remained, her dark hair tied back in a practical knot, her academy uniform rolled up at the sleeves. She worked with the precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before, though her classmates would have been surprised to know it. To them, she was just another human recruit, the species everyone tolerated but few respected, known more for their political connections than their military prowess. The cleaning cloth moved across the barrel in smooth, practiced strokes. Isabella's green eyes remained focused on her work, but she was acutely aware of the presence that had been watching her for the past 20 minutes. 3 figures stood in the shadows near the entrance, thinking themselves unobserved. She recognized them without looking up. Cadet Zarthak, a Krillian whose 6-foot frame was built like a natural weapon, with chitinous plates covering his shoulders and arms. Cadet Mirian Veltar, a Thessian whose pale blue skin seemed to glow faintly in the bay's artificial lighting. And Cadet Thorgan Ironscale, a Draconian whose reptilian features and amber eyes made him look perpetually suspicious of everything around him. They whispered among themselves in what they assumed was hushed tones, but Isabella's hearing had been trained to pick up much quieter sounds than their speculation about why the human was playing with that antique when she should be studying for tomorrow's tactical assessment. The Krillian's translator rendered his clicks and whistles into standard galactic with typical mechanical precision, while the Thessian's melodic tones carried undertones of condescension that needed no translation. Isabella lifted the weapon's receiver to the light, examining the interior mechanisms with an expression of quiet satisfaction. The design was elegant in its simplicity, no energy cells to maintain, no plasma conduits to replace, no quantum stabilizers that might fail at the worst possible moment, just metal, springs, and the kind of engineering that had been perfected through necessity and refined by generations of use. She could field strip this weapon blindfolded, in zero gravity, under enemy fire, and reassemble it with nothing but her fingertips and muscle memory. The cleaning rod slid through the barrel with practiced ease, each stroke removing microscopic particles of residue that most people would never notice. But Isabella had learned long ago that the difference between life and death often came down to microscopic details: a single grain of sand in the wrong place, a spring that had lost just a fraction of its tension, a firing pin that was a millimeter out of alignment. Her instructors here at the academy taught weapon maintenance as a routine procedure, something to be completed efficiently and forgotten. They had never learned that for some people, weapons maintenance was a meditation, a ritual, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and oblivion. The Draconian shifted his weight, the motion causing his scales to catch the overhead lighting. "Look at her technique," he murmured to his companions, though his tone suggested he was more puzzled than impressed. "She handles that relic like it's some kind of sacred artifact. Humans and their attachment to primitive technology. It's almost anthropologically fascinating." Mirian Veltar's response carried the kind of amused dismissal that her species was famous for. The Thessians had mastered energy-based warfare centuries ago, and their weapons were works of art as much as instruments of destruction. "Perhaps it's some kind of cultural ritual," she suggested, her voice carrying harmonics that would have been beautiful if not for the underlying mockery. "Humans are known for their superstitions about objects. Maybe she believes it will bring her luck in combat scenarios." Isabella's movements never slowed, but something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times: the casual dismissal of human capabilities, the assumption that their technology was primitive because it was physical rather than energy-based, the barely concealed amusement at human superstitions and rituals. Her fellow cadets weren't malicious exactly. They were simply products of their respective cultures, raised with the comfortable assumption that their species' approach to warfare was naturally superior to the crude solutions that humans had developed. The gun oil caught the light as she applied it to the moving parts, each component receiving exactly the amount of lubrication it needed. Too little, and friction would slow the action. Too much, and dust would accumulate in the excess oil, creating problems down the line. It was a balance that had to be learned through experience rather than instruction, the kind of knowledge that came from years of depending on your weapon in situations where failure meant death. Zarthak's chitinous plates clicked together as he crossed his arms, a sound that usually indicated skepticism among his people. "The combat instructors say humans have potential," he admitted, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "But their equipment always looks so crude. That weapon she's cleaning probably dates back to their pre-spaceflight era. How can something that primitive be effective against modern energy shields and armor systems?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, though Isabella gave no sign of having heard it. She continued her work with the same methodical precision, but now there was something different in her posture, a subtle tension that spoke of readiness rather than relaxation. The weapon was nearly complete now, its components cleaned to a degree that would have satisfied the most demanding inspection. But she continued working, taking apart sections that were already spotless, examining springs and pins that showed no signs of wear. It was a ritual, as the Thessian had guessed, but not the kind they imagined. This was the ritual of someone who had learned that preparedness was the only prayer that might be answered when the shooting started. Every component she cleaned was a hedge against disaster. Every inspection was insurance against the moment when everything else failed. The galaxy was full of species with superior technology, advanced tactics, and evolutionary advantages that humans could never match. But Isabella had learned something that her instructors here couldn't teach. Sometimes the most sophisticated solution wasn't the most reliable one. The conversation behind her continued. The three cadets apparently feeling secure in their anonymity, they discussed the upcoming war games, speculated about human combat effectiveness, and shared stories they'd heard about Terran military units. Most of the stories were dismissive, tales of humans who relied on obsolete equipment and brute force tactics against enemies who should have outmatched them easily. A few stories carried grudging respect, accounts of human units that had achieved victories through what other species termed tactical unpredictability, but which usually just meant that humans were willing to try things that more logical species would reject as too dangerous or too crude to work. Isabella's hands moved with increasing efficiency as the conversation wore on. She had heard these discussions before, had listened to instructors and classmates debate whether humans deserved their place in the Galactic Defense Academy. Some argued that Terran political influence had bought humanity a seat at the table that their military capabilities hadn't earned. Others suggested that humans might have potential that hadn't been properly developed yet. A few openly questioned whether Earth's species was advanced enough to contribute meaningfully to galactic defense. The reassembly process began with the same deliberate precision that had marked the cleaning. Each component slid into place with the satisfaction of metal finding its intended home, springs compressing to exactly the right tension, pins sliding through holes that had been machined to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Isabella's fingers worked without conscious direction, muscle memory guiding each motion, while her mind processed the continuing conversation behind her. "I heard from Cadet Rexalon that the humans in his tactical studies group couldn't even understand basic energy weapon maintenance," Thorgan was saying, his scaled tail twitching with what passed for amusement among Draconians. They kept asking about mechanical backup systems and manual overrides, as if modern weapons needed such primitive redundancies. Mirian's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, beautiful and cutting at the same time. Rexelon probably didn't explain it properly. Humans think very linearly. They have trouble grasping systems that operate on quantum principles. It's not really their fault. Their neural architecture evolved for a much simpler technological environment. Isabella slid the bolt assembly into position, the metal making the faintest whisper of sound as it seated properly. The weapon was taking shape again, transforming from a collection of parts into something purposeful and deadly. Her movements remained steady, but there was something building behind her calm exterior. Not anger exactly, but a kind of focused intensity that her old unit would have recognized as a warning sign. Zarthak shifted his position, moving closer to get a better view of her work. "Look at how long this is taking her," he observed, his translator giving his words a slightly mechanical edge. "Our energy weapons require maybe 5 minutes for complete maintenance. She's been at this for over an hour, and it's just a ballistic projectile launcher. The inefficiency is remarkable." The trigger assembly clicked into place with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet bay. Isabella's movements paused for just a moment, the first break in her rhythm since she'd begun working. The pause lasted perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for her to take a slow breath and for something in her expression to settle into a different configuration entirely. "Inefficiency," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the maintenance bay despite its low volume. Interesting choice of words. The 3 cadets fell silent immediately, suddenly aware that their conversation had not been as private as they'd assumed. Isabella continued working, her hands now moving with even greater precision as she fitted the final components into place. The silence stretched uncomfortably, filled only by the soft sounds of metal touching metal and the ambient hum of the station's life support systems. Thorgan was the first to recover, his draconian pride not allowing him to appear embarrassed by the situation. "We weren't trying to be secretive, Cadet Reeves," he said, his tone attempting to strike a balance between friendliness and authority. "We're simply curious about human methodology. Your approach to equipment maintenance is quite different from what we're accustomed to." Isabella's hands never stopped moving, but her head tilted slightly in acknowledgement of the comment. "Different," she agreed. "That's one way to put it." The final pin slid home with a satisfying click, and she set the completed weapon down on the workbench, her fingers still resting on its stock. This ballistic projectile launcher is a Model 1911 pistol. The design is roughly 450 Terran years old. The specific weapon you're looking at has been in service for 237 years. Miriam stepped forward, her curiosity apparently overcoming her earlier dismissiveness. 237 years. The harmonics in her voice suggested genuine surprise. That's impossible. No weapon could remain functional for that long without major technological updates. The metallurgy alone would be insufficient to maintain structural integrity over such a time span. "The metallurgy," Isabella repeated, and there was something almost fond in her voice as she ran her fingers along the weapon's frame, "is actually quite sophisticated. This particular pistol is constructed from materials that were state-of-the-art when it was manufactured. High-carbon steel with precise alloy compositions, corrosion-resistant coatings that were revolutionary for their time, and tolerances that required machinery more accurate than most species possessed when they first achieved spaceflight." She picked up the weapon and worked the slide, the action cycling with the smooth precision of well-maintained machinery. The sound it made was distinctive, not the electronic hum of energy weapons or the quantum resonance of plasma projectors, but the solid mechanical sound of metal moving against metal with perfect timing. It was a sound that spoke of reliability, of engineering refined through necessity rather than theoretical optimization. Zarthak's chitinous plates shifted as he leaned forward to get a better look. "But surely the ammunition must be problematic," he said, his voice carrying the reasonable tone of someone pointing out an obvious flaw. Ballistic projectiles require physical storage. They have limited capacity, and they must be manufactured to precise specifications. Energy weapons draw from standard power cells that can be replicated anywhere. The logistics alone make your approach impractical for extended operations. Isabella's smile was brief, but unmistakably genuine. You'd think so, wouldn't you? She reached into her equipment bag and withdrew a small ammunition magazine, its metal surface showing the same careful maintenance as the weapon itself. This magazine holds 7 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition. Each round consists of a brass cartridge case, gunpowder propellant, and a lead projectile with a mass of approximately 15 grams. The entire system operates on principles that were well understood before my species left their home planet. She slid the magazine into the weapon with a motion so smooth it seemed choreographed, then worked the slide to chamber around. The mechanical sounds carried clearly in the quiet bay, each action producing its distinctive note in what sounded almost like a mechanical symphony. The ammunition is simple enough that it can be manufactured with equipment that fits in a backpack. The propellant can be produced from materials available on virtually any habitable planet. The projectiles can be cast from local metals or even salvaged materials if necessary. Thorgan's amber eyes narrowed as he processed this information. But the effectiveness against modern armor systems must be minimal, he argued, though his tone suggested he was beginning to have doubts about his assumptions. Kinetic projectiles simply cannot penetrate energy shields or composite armor plating. The physics are straightforward. A low-velocity projectile lacks the energy density required to overcome advanced defensive systems. Low velocity, Isabella said, and her voice carried a note that made all 3 aliens take an unconscious step backward. Another interesting assumption. She moved to the firing range control panel, her motions businesslike and efficient. The range came online with a series of status lights, safety systems activating automatically. Computer, configure target range for live fire exercise. Standard humanoid target at 25 meters. Activate energy shield at military specification levels. The range reconfigured itself with mechanical precision, barriers sliding into place, and defensive systems powering up. A target appeared at the far end, a roughly humanoid shape made from materials designed to simulate various types of armor and shielding. The energy barrier that materialized around it was visible as a faint blue shimmer in the air, the kind of personal defense system that was standard equipment for most galactic military units. That shield configuration will stop plasma bolts, particle beams, and most energy-based projectiles, Miriam observed, her earlier condescension replaced by what sounded like genuine interest. It's rated for protection against weapons that deliver up to 15 kilojoules per pulse. Your ballistic projectile might have significant kinetic energy, but it lacks the energy density required to overload the shield matrix. Isabella raised the ancient pistol, her stance shifting into something that was unmistakably professional. Her feet found their positions automatically, her grip settled into place with the certainty of long practice, and her breathing shifted into the steady rhythm that preceded accurate shooting. The transformation was remarkable. She had gone from a student tinkering with old equipment to something that looked very much like a predator preparing to strike. The first shot came without warning, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the maintenance bay with a violence that made all 3 alien cadets flinch involuntarily. The report was nothing like the clean hum of energy weapons or the focused crack of plasma discharge. It was a raw, primal sound that seemed to come from some earlier age when warfare was conducted with cruder tools and deadlier intent. The muzzle flash lit up Isabella's face for a split second, revealing an expression of calm concentration that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. The energy shield around the target flickered and died. Impossible, Thorgan breathed, his scaled features showing the kind of confusion that came from watching fundamental assumptions dissolve before his eyes. Energy shields don't fail from kinetic impact. The physics are clear. Ballistic projectiles lack the energy density to overload shield matrices. There must be some malfunction in the targeting system. Isabella's second shot followed so quickly after the first that the sounds almost blended together, the mechanical cycling of the pistol's action providing a brief bridge between the two reports. This round struck the target's center mass with an impact that was visible even from across the firing range, a small hole that appeared with surgical precision exactly where a humanoid's heart would be located. "Computer," Isabella called, her voice carrying clearly, despite the ringing echoes of the gunshots. "Analyze shield failure and target impact. Display results." The range's analysis system processed the data with typical machine efficiency, projecting a holographic display that showed the shield's energy matrix at the moment of impact. The readings were precise and unambiguous. The shield had not been overloaded in the conventional sense. Instead, the projectile had passed through it as if the barrier hadn't existed at all. Zarthak's chitinous plates clicked together in a rapid pattern that indicated extreme agitation among his people. "The shield matrix shows no energy disruption," he said, his voice carrying the flat tone that Krillians used when confronting incomprehensible data. "The projectile somehow bypassed the energy barrier entirely. This violates basic principles of shield technology that have been established for centuries." Isabella lowered the weapon, engaging the safety with the same automatic precision that had marked all her movements. "Your shield technology," she said, and there was something almost gentle in her correction, "is designed to stop energy-based attacks. Plasma bolts, particle beams, coherent light weapons, quantum disruptors, all of them operate by transferring energy into a target. Your shields work by creating an energy barrier that absorbs or deflects that incoming energy." She moved to the firing line, her steps measured and deliberate. The target showed the evidence of her marksmanship clearly. 2 holes, each precisely placed, each representing a shot that would have been immediately fatal to most humanoid species. The surrounding material showed no signs of burning, melting, or energy discharge. Just clean holes punched through synthetic flesh and composite bone with mechanical precision. "But this," she continued, holding up the pistol so that the aliens could see it clearly, "doesn't transfer energy to the target. It transfers mass. A 15-gram projectile moving at approximately 400 meters per second carries roughly 1,200 joules of kinetic energy. That's considerably less than your plasma weapons, which is why most species consider ballistic weapons to be primitive." Miriam's harmonics shifted into frequencies that indicated deep concentration, her species equivalent of frowning. "But 1,200 joules should be insufficient to cause significant damage to military-grade armor," she said, though her tone suggested she was beginning to doubt her own statement. "Even without shield protection, modern body armor is designed to disperse kinetic impact across a wide area. The physics should favor the armor." Isabella's smile was brief but unmistakably sharp. "Physics," she agreed. "Let's talk about physics. Your armor systems are excellent at dispersing energy and distributing impact forces. They're designed to handle the broad-spectrum effects of plasma discharge and particle beam weapons, but they work on the principle that incoming threats will behave in predictable ways, that they'll deliver their energy over a relatively large area, and that they'll interact with matter according to established energy transfer models." She walked to the equipment locker and retrieved a piece of standard military armor, the kind that was issued to galactic defense forces throughout the sector. The composite materials gleamed under the bay's lighting, their surface showing the complex layered structure that made them so effective against conventional weapons. She held it up so that the aliens could see its construction clearly. "This armor," she continued, "is designed to ablate under plasma impact, to conduct heat away from critical areas, and to maintain structural integrity under broad-spectrum energy bombardment. It's sophisticated technology that represents centuries of development and refinement. Against energy weapons, it's remarkably effective." She set the armor plate on the firing line and returned to her shooting position. The ancient pistol came up again with the same smooth precision, her stance settling into the same professional configuration. This time, however, she took longer to aim, her breathing steadying into the rhythm that preceded precision shooting. "But it wasn't designed to handle this," she said, and fired. The projectile struck the armor plate with an impact that was both violent and surgical. The advanced composites, designed to withstand plasma bolts that could melt steel, simply failed. The bullet punched through the layered protection as if it were fabric, creating a hole that was shockingly clean and perfectly round. The sophisticated energy dispersion systems, the thermal conductors, the impact distribution matrices, none of them had any effect on a simple piece of lead moving at ballistic velocity. Zarthak approached the damaged armor with the careful movements of someone examining an impossible artifact. His fingers traced the edges of the hole, and Isabella could see him struggling to reconcile what he was observing with everything he had been taught about materials science and defensive systems. "The impact was so concentrated," he said finally, his voice carrying the tone of someone thinking aloud rather than making conversation. "The projectile didn't interact with the armor's defensive systems at all. It simply punched through before those systems could respond. It's like—" He paused, searching for an analogy that would make sense to his companions. "Like using a hammer to break a spiderweb," Thorgan said, his draconian features showing the kind of respect that his species reserved for genuine revelations. "The web might be able to stop insects, even small birds, but it has no defense against something that simply ignores its structural advantages and applies force in a way it wasn't designed to handle." Isabella nodded, pleased that at least one of them was beginning to understand. "Exactly. Your energy weapons are sophisticated, efficient, and incredibly effective against targets that are designed to defend against them. But they operate within established parameters: energy densities, heat transfer rates, electromagnetic interactions. Those parameters define both their capabilities and their limitations." She gestured toward the damaged armor, then toward the target that showed the evidence of her earlier shooting. "This weapon system operates outside those parameters entirely. It's not more advanced than your technology. In many ways, it's considerably more primitive, but it's primitive in ways that modern defense systems weren't designed to counter." Miriam moved closer to examine the weapon, her earlier dismissiveness completely absent now. The Thessian's pale blue skin seemed to glow more intensely as she concentrated, her species' physiological response to intellectual stimulation. "May I?" she asked, indicating the pistol. Isabella nodded and handed over the weapon, taking care to point the muzzle in a safe direction and demonstrating the safety mechanisms. "The safety is here," she explained, showing the small lever. "Never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy, even when the safety is engaged. Always assume it's loaded unless you've personally verified otherwise, and keep your finger off the trigger unless you're ready to fire." The Thessian received the weapon with the careful respect that she might have shown to a dangerous artifact from some ancient civilization. Her slender fingers explored its contours, testing the weight distribution and examining the mechanical interfaces. "It's so solid," she said, and there was genuine wonder in her harmonics. "Energy weapons feel powerful, but this feels substantial, like holding a piece of concentrated purpose." "That's not a bad description," Isabella agreed. "This particular weapon has been in continuous service for over 2 centuries. It's been carried through conflicts that most of the galaxy has forgotten, used in situations where more advanced weapons would have failed due to environmental conditions, power limitations, or simple mechanical complexity." Zarthak's attention had shifted from the weapon to Isabella herself, his compound eyes studying her with the intensity that Krillians brought to analyzing potential threats. "You handle that weapon like you've used it in actual combat," he observed, and his voice carried undertones that suggested this was more than casual curiosity. "Academy training doesn't produce that kind of muscle memory. That level of familiarity comes from experience." Isabella took the weapon back and began the process of unloading it, her movements automatic and sure. The magazine dropped into her palm. She worked the slide to eject the chambered round, then conducted a visual inspection to verify the weapon was clear. Each action flowed into the next, with the kind of precision that only came from thousands of repetitions under varying conditions. "You're observant," she said, and something in her tone suggested that this was both a compliment and an acknowledgement of danger. Most humans who attend the academy come straight from civilian life or basic military training. They learn about advanced galactic technologies and gradually adapt to energy weapons and quantum-based tactical systems. Their experience with projectile weapons is usually limited to historical study and basic familiarization training. She secured the pistol in its holster and began collecting her cleaning supplies, her movements maintaining the same methodical efficiency that had marked her entire maintenance routine. "I'm not most humans." Thorgan's tail moved in the slow, deliberate pattern that indicated deep thought among his people. "Your service record lists you as a recent graduate from the Terran Colonial Defense Academy," he said, though his tone suggested he was beginning to question the accuracy of that information. "Standard educational progression, no combat deployments, recommended for galactic service based on academic performance and leadership potential. But that record doesn't match what we're observing." Isabella's hands paused in their cleaning routine just for a moment before resuming their systematic work. "Service records," she said carefully, "contain the information that command authority decides should be available to other personnel. Sometimes that information provides a complete picture of an individual's background and experience. Sometimes it provides the picture that best serves operational security and mission requirements." The maintenance bay fell silent, except for the ambient hum of station systems and the soft sounds of Isabella packing her equipment. The three alien cadets exchanged glances, each recognizing that they had stumbled into something more complex than a simple cultural misunderstanding about weapons technology. The human in front of them was not the naive student they had assumed her to be, and the weapon she carried was not the primitive antique they had dismissed. Miriam was the first to break the silence, her harmonics carrying frequencies associated with respectful curiosity rather than casual interest. "Would you be willing to tell us what that record doesn't include?" she asked. "Not the classified details, but perhaps enough to help us understand why you're here and what we might learn from you." Isabella considered the request while she organized her cleaning kit, taking time to evaluate both the question and the cadets who had asked it. These three had approached her with casual dismissiveness, observed her work with amused condescension, and made assumptions about human capabilities based on limited information and cultural prejudices. But they had also been willing to revise their assumptions when confronted with evidence that contradicted their expectations, and they had asked direct questions rather than continuing to speculate behind her back. "The Terran Colonial Defense Force," she said finally, "maintains security for human settlements in contested regions of the galaxy. Most of our colonies are established on worlds that other species consider marginal, too dangerous, too resource-poor, or too strategically insignificant to be worth their attention. We go to those places because we're good at making difficult situations work, and because sometimes marginal locations turn out to be more valuable than initial surveys suggested." She secured the last of her equipment and turned to face the three aliens directly, her posture shifting into something that was unmistakably military despite the academy uniform. Some of those colonies face challenges that can't be addressed through diplomatic channels or conventional galactic defense protocols: environmental hazards, hostile native species, resource conflicts with established powers, or simply the kind of isolation that makes standard support impossible. When those situations develop, the Colonial Defense Force sends in specialists who can operate independently and solve problems that don't have textbook solutions. Zarthak's chitinous plates had settled into the configuration that indicated respectful attention among his people. "And you're one of those specialists," he said, though his tone made it clear that this was a statement rather than a question. "I was," Isabella confirmed. For 8 years, on 17 different worlds, in situations that ranged from planetary evacuations to extended combat operations against forces that most galactic species consider mythological, I learned to use weapons that would function in environments where energy-based systems failed, to maintain equipment that couldn't be replaced or repaired through normal supply chains, and to solve tactical problems using whatever resources were available locally. She gestured toward the holstered pistol, her expression carrying a mix of pride and something that might have been affection. This weapon has been with me through all of it. It's functioned in Arctic conditions that would freeze energy cells, in desert heat that would overload plasma conduits, in electromagnetic storms that would disrupt quantum targeting systems, and in situations where the nearest supply depot was months away by faster-than-light travel. Thorgan stepped closer, his reptilian features showing the kind of focused attention that his species reserved for matters of genuine importance. 17 worlds, he repeated, and the way he said it suggested he was beginning to understand the significance of that number. The Academy teaches us about colonial defense operations, but most of the case studies involve single deployments or specialized missions. Multiple deployments across different environmental conditions would require extensive adaptation and learning. Isabella nodded, recognizing that the Draconian was making connections that went beyond simple military experience. Every world presents unique challenges, she agreed. Different gravity levels, atmospheric compositions, native species, resource availability, technological infrastructure. What works on a high-gravity desert world might be completely inappropriate for a low-gravity Arctic environment. Successful operations require the ability to adapt quickly and thoroughly to local conditions. She moved to the equipment locker and retrieved a small case that the aliens had not noticed before, its surface showing the kind of wear that spoke of extensive field use. Opening it revealed an array of tools and components that looked nothing like standard Academy equipment. Some were clearly manufactured, while others appeared to have been crafted from salvaged materials or local resources. Standard galactic military doctrine, she continued, assumes that operations will be supported by established logistics networks, that replacement parts and ammunition will be available through normal supply chains, and that tactical situations will conform to established parameters. Those assumptions work well for operations in settled regions of the galaxy, where infrastructure exists and support can be guaranteed. She selected a small device from the case, something that looked like a hybrid between a standard multi-tool and a piece of improvised engineering, but they don't work in colonial environments, especially during crisis situations. When your nearest support is 3 months away by FTL, when local resources are limited or hostile, when the tactical situation doesn't match anything in the training manuals, you learn to improvise, adapt, and overcome using whatever is available. Miriam examined the device with the careful attention that her species brought to analyzing unfamiliar technology. This appears to be a combination ammunition fabrication unit and field repair kit, she observed, her harmonics indicating both surprise and appreciation, but the design incorporates principles that I've never seen before, hybrid chemical/mechanical processes that seem designed to work with locally sourced materials. Field expedient manufacturing, Isabella confirmed. That particular unit can produce ammunition for this weapon using materials that can be found on most inhabited worlds: sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter for the propellant, lead, copper, or even iron for the projectiles, brass, steel, or various alloys for the cartridge cases. It's not as precise or efficient as factory production, but it works when factory production isn't available. Zarthak's compound eyes examined the various components with the systematic attention that his people applied to technical analysis. The sophistication is remarkable, he said, but it's sophistication in a completely different direction from what we're accustomed to seeing. Instead of increasing the energy density or improving the technological complexity, this approach focuses on reliability and maintainability under adverse conditions. Exactly, Isabella said. and there was unmistakable approval in her voice. Most galactic species develop weapons technology along a path that emphasizes increased capability through increased complexity, more powerful energy sources, more sophisticated targeting systems, more advanced materials and manufacturing techniques. That approach produces remarkable results under optimal conditions. She reassembled the field kit with practiced efficiency, each component finding its designated position in the compact case. But complex systems have complex failure modes. Quantum targeting systems require quantum processors that can be damaged by electromagnetic interference. Plasma weapons need energy cells that can be degraded by extreme temperatures. Advanced materials might have superior performance characteristics, but they also require advanced manufacturing facilities to repair or replace. Thorgan's tail moved in the slow patterns that indicated deep thought among his species. So, human military philosophy emphasizes robustness over capability, he said, though his tone suggested he was still working through the implications of this approach. You accept reduced performance in exchange for increased reliability under adverse conditions. Isabella's smile suggested that he was beginning to understand, but that his analysis was incomplete. That's part of it, she agreed, but it's not the whole picture. We don't just accept reduced performance, we optimize for different performance criteria. Instead of maximizing energy output or technological sophistication, we maximize effectiveness under real-world conditions. She drew the pistol again, her movements demonstrating the smooth efficiency that had impressed the aliens earlier. This weapon will function reliably at temperatures ranging from 40 below zero to over 50 degrees Celsius. It will operate in vacuum, underwater, in corrosive atmospheres, and in electromagnetic environments that would disrupt most energy-based systems. It requires no external power source, no rare materials for maintenance, and no advanced manufacturing facilities for ammunition production. Working the slide demonstrated the mechanical precision of the system, each component moving with the smooth efficiency that came from careful maintenance and quality engineering. More importantly, it's completely immune to the kinds of electronic warfare that can disable advanced weapon systems. No quantum processors to disrupt, no energy matrices to overload, no targeting computers to confuse with false signals. Point, squeeze the trigger, and the weapon fires. The only way to stop it is to physically damage the mechanical components. Miriam's harmonics shifted into frequencies associated with genuine respect, a significant change from her earlier dismissiveness. You're describing a weapon system that prioritizes tactical reliability over technical advancement, she said, and her tone indicated that she was beginning to appreciate the sophistication of this approach. In environments where advanced support is unavailable or enemy capabilities are unknown, such reliability would provide significant advantages. Unknown enemy capabilities, Isabella repeated, and something in her voice suggested that this was a particularly important point. Most galactic military training assumes that enemy forces will use familiar technology, energy weapons, quantum targeting, conventional armor systems, established tactical doctrine. Training scenarios are designed around conflicts between forces that understand each other's capabilities and operate according to known parameters. She secured the weapon and turned to face the three aliens directly, her expression carrying the kind of serious attention that commanded respect across species boundaries. But colonial defense operations often involve contact with species or forces that don't operate according to established parameters. Native species that have developed unique defensive capabilities, rogue factions using improvised or hybrid technologies, environmental hazards that don't respond to conventional countermeasures, or simply tactical situations that don't match anything in the training databases. The maintenance bay had grown quiet, except for the ambient sounds of station operations, but the silence carried a different quality now, not the uncomfortable awkwardness of earlier, but the focused attention of students who had encountered something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about warfare and survival. In those situations, Isabella continued, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience, the most sophisticated weapon in the galaxy is useless if you don't understand how to employ it effectively against an unknown threat. But a simple, reliable tool that you understand completely, one that will function regardless of environmental conditions or enemy countermeasures, gives you options that more advanced systems might not provide. She moved to the damaged armor plate and examined the hole that her shot had created, running her finger around its edges with the careful attention of someone conducting a forensic analysis. This armor was designed by some of the most brilliant military engineers in the galaxy. It incorporates centuries of research into materials science, energy dispersal, and defensive systems. Against the weapons it was designed to counter, it provides excellent protection. Zarthak joined her at the armor plate, his chitinous features showing the kind of concentrated attention that his people brought to analyzing tactical problems. But it was not designed to counter kinetic projectiles moving at ballistic velocity, he said, and his tone suggested that he was beginning to understand the broader implications of what he had observed. The defensive systems simply have no mechanism for addressing that type of threat. More than that, Isabella said, and her voice carried a note of satisfaction at his growing understanding. The armor's designers assumed that any kinetic threat would be delivered by advanced systems, railguns, mass drivers, or kinetic kill vehicles that operate at extremely high velocities and deliver enormous amounts of energy. Their countermeasures are designed for those kinds of attacks. She picked up the spent cartridge case from her earlier shooting, the brass gleaming under the maintenance bay's lighting. But this system operates in a completely different energy regime. The projectile moves fast enough to penetrate the armor, but slowly enough that the armor's sensors don't recognize it as a significant threat. The impact energy is too low to trigger ablative responses, but too concentrated for the dispersal systems to handle effectively. It falls into a gap between the defensive capabilities that the designers anticipated. Thorgan's amber eyes gleamed with the kind of appreciation that Draconians reserved for elegant tactical solutions. A gap that exists because the armor was designed to counter sophisticated threats rather than simple ones, he said, his tail moving in patterns that indicated increasing excitement. The same gap might exist in other defensive systems, shields, point defense networks, even tactical doctrine that assumes enemies will employ familiar technologies. Mirian's harmonics had shifted into frequencies that indicated rapid cognitive processing, her species' response to encountering particularly intriguing information. This suggests that human military philosophy incorporates deliberate technological primitivism as a tactical advantage, she said, though her tone made it clear that she was still working through the implications. By maintaining weapons and tactics that other species consider obsolete, you create capabilities that modern defensive systems are not designed to counter. Isabella nodded, clearly pleased that the Thessian was grasping the deeper principles involved. Technological primitivism is one aspect, she agreed, but it's more accurate to say that we maintain technological diversity. We use energy weapons when they're appropriate, kinetic systems when they offer advantages, and hybrid approaches when the situation calls for them. The key is matching the tool to the mission rather than assuming that more advanced always means more effective. She began organizing her equipment for transport, her movements maintaining the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire evening. During my time with Colonial Defense, I carried energy weapons, kinetic weapons, improvised explosives, chemical agents, and tools that don't fit into any standard category. The specific loadout depended on the mission parameters, enemy capabilities, environmental conditions, and available resources. Zarthak helped her secure the cleaning kit, his actions showing the kind of respect that warriors offered to other warriors regardless of species. But maintaining proficiency with such diverse systems must require extensive training and constant practice, he observed. Most military specialists focus on mastering specific technologies rather than attempting to maintain competence across multiple systems. That's true for most military operations, Isabella agreed, but colonial defense work requires generalists rather than specialists. When you're operating independently with limited support, you need to be able to adapt to whatever challenges arise. Sometimes that means using advanced galactic technology to solve problems that would be impossible with primitive tools. Sometimes it means using primitive tools to solve problems that advanced technology can't handle. She secured the field kit and tucked it into her equipment bag, the case disappearing with the kind of practiced concealment that suggested she had learned to keep valuable items out of sight. And sometimes it means recognizing that the most effective solution combines elements from multiple technological approaches in ways that no single system could achieve. Thorgan's expression had shifted into something that resembled admiration mixed with wariness, the look that predators gave to other predators when acknowledging mutual respect. Your presence at the Academy, he said carefully, is not actually about learning galactic military technologies, is it? You already understand those technologies well enough to employ them effectively. You're here for a different purpose. Isabella's smile was brief but unmistakably genuine, carrying the warmth of someone who appreciated directness and accurate observation. Very good, she said, and her tone carried the kind of approval that instructors gave to students who had grasped particularly complex concepts. The Academy provides excellent instruction in galactic military technologies, tactical doctrine, and strategic planning, but that instruction is designed for officers who will operate within established military hierarchies with predictable support structures. She moved toward the exit, her gait showing the balanced alertness that came from years of operating in potentially dangerous environments. Colonial defense operations require officers who can work effectively with representatives from multiple species, who understand the capabilities and limitations of different technological approaches, and who can build cooperative relationships even in high-stress situations. The three alien cadets fell into step beside her, their earlier casual dismissiveness completely replaced by the focused attention of students who had recognized a valuable learning opportunity. As they walked through the corridors of the Academy station, other cadets they passed showed the usual mix of curiosity and indifference that characterized most student interactions. None of them seemed to recognize that they had just witnessed a demonstration that challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness and technological superiority. The Academy, Isabella continued as they made their way toward the residential quarters, provides the perfect environment for that kind of learning. Cadets from dozens of different species, each bringing their own cultural perspectives and technological approaches, all working together in controlled scenarios that simulate real-world challenges. For someone whose job involves building coalitions and solving problems through cooperation rather than force, this experience is invaluable. Miriam's harmonics carried notes of curiosity mixed with something that might have been concern. But doesn't your presence here under false pretenses create ethical problems? She asked, though her tone suggested genuine interest rather than accusation. The other cadets believe you're a student like themselves, but you're actually an experienced operator with capabilities that far exceed what your official record indicates. Isabella paused at the intersection that led to their respective quarters, her expression showing the kind of careful consideration that difficult questions deserved. My record accurately reflects my educational background and the specific experiences that Command Authority decided were relevant to my Academy assignment, she said carefully. The fact that it doesn't include classified operational details is standard procedure for personnel in sensitive positions. She looked at each of the three aliens in turn, her gaze carrying the weight of someone making important decisions about trust and disclosure. More importantly, my purpose here isn't to deceive anyone or to gain unfair advantages in academic competitions. I'm here to learn from you, to understand how different species approach tactical problems, to appreciate the strengths and limitations of various technological solutions, and to develop the kind of cross-cultural competence that effective coalition operations require. Zarthak's chitinous plates had settled into the configuration that indicated respectful understanding among his people. "And tonight's demonstration?" he asked, gesturing back toward the maintenance bay where the evening's events had unfolded. "Was that part of your learning objectives, or did we simply stumble into something that required clarification?" Isabella's laugh was brief but genuine, carrying the warmth of someone who could appreciate irony even in serious situations. "Tonight was supposed to be routine equipment maintenance," she admitted. "I clean my weapons every few days, regardless of whether I've fired them. It's a habit that's kept me alive through situations where mechanical failure would have been fatal. I wasn't planning to provide tactical demonstrations or challenge anyone's assumptions about human capabilities." She shifted her equipment bag to a more comfortable position, the movement revealing just how much gear she routinely carried despite the Academy's relaxed environment. "But when I overheard your conversation about human primitiveness and the ineffectiveness of ballistic weapons, I realized that you were making assumptions that could be dangerous in real operational environments. Officers who underestimate potential allies or dismiss unfamiliar technologies as ineffective often find themselves unprepared for situations that don't match their training scenarios." Thorgan's tail moved in the slow, deliberate patterns that indicated deep thought among his species. "So tonight's lesson was as much for our benefit as for your own," he said, and his tone carried the kind of appreciation that warriors showed for teachers who used practical rather than theoretical instruction. "You allowed us to discover the flaws in our assumptions through direct observation rather than simply telling us we were wrong." "The best lessons," Isabella agreed, "are the ones where students reach correct conclusions through their own analysis rather than accepting information based on instructor authority. Tonight, you observed evidence that contradicted your assumptions, analyzed that evidence systematically, and revised your understanding based on what you learned. That's the kind of intellectual flexibility that effective officers need, regardless of their species or technological background." As they reached the point where their paths diverged toward different residential sections, the three alien cadets lingered, clearly reluctant to end a conversation that had challenged so many of their preconceptions. Isabella recognized their hesitation and made a decision that reflected her growing confidence in their discretion and intellectual honesty. "If you're interested in continuing this discussion," she said, her voice carrying an invitation that was carefully casual, "I conduct field training exercises most evenings after standard academic schedules. Nothing that conflicts with academy regulations or curriculum requirements, but practical applications of the theories we study in class. Tonight's demonstration was basic weapons familiarization, but the principles apply to broader tactical and strategic questions. Miriam's harmonics shifted into frequencies associated with eager interest, though she maintained the dignified composure that her species considered appropriate for formal interactions. "We would be very interested in such training," she said, speaking for all three of them with the kind of confident authority that suggested they had already discussed this possibility among themselves. "Tonight has made it clear that our understanding of military effectiveness and technological applications has significant gaps that standard academy instruction might not address." Isabella nodded, recognizing the commitment that their request represented and the trust it implied. "Tomorrow evening, then. Same maintenance bay, after the facility closes to general student access. Come prepared for practical exercises rather than theoretical discussion, and remember that everything we cover falls under standard academy confidentiality protocols." As the three aliens headed toward their respective quarters, their conversations continuing in the excited tones of students who had encountered genuinely transformative information, Isabella made her way toward her own room. The corridors of the Academy station hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology, filled with the comfortable assumption that sophisticated systems provided optimal solutions to complex problems. But in her equipment bag, secured alongside tools that most of her classmates would consider primitive, An ancient pistol waited for its next opportunity to demonstrate that sometimes the most effective solutions were also the simplest ones. And in the maintenance bay behind them, a piece of advanced armor bore witness to the truth that even the most sophisticated defenses could be overcome by someone who understood the difference between complexity and effectiveness. The galaxy was vast, filled with species that had developed remarkable technologies and sophisticated approaches to warfare and survival, but it was also filled with challenges that couldn't be solved through technological advancement alone, situations that required the kind of adaptability, resourcefulness, and tactical innovation that came from learning to succeed with whatever tools were available. Isabella had spent 8 years learning those lessons on 17 different worlds, in situations that had taught her the value of simplicity, reliability, and the kind of thorough preparation that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Tomorrow evening, she would begin sharing those lessons with 3 cadets who had demonstrated the intellectual courage to question their assumptions and the tactical wisdom to recognize that effective officers never stopped learning. The ancient pistol had outlasted entire civilizations not because it was the most advanced weapon ever created, but because it embodied principles that transcended technological fashion and species-specific approaches to problem-solving. In the hands of someone who understood those principles, it remained as effective today as it had been centuries earlier, ready to remind anyone who underestimated human ingenuity that sometimes the oldest solutions were also the best ones.